welcome, guys. This is the second workshop we're having as a part of our Flutter. This one's going to be a lot more technical. We spent quite a bit of time in the last workshop going over Flutter, what it is, and all that type of stuff. So if we look at the repo for the last workshop, we can see we discussed what Flutter is, what Dart is, how to create a project in Flutter, discussing the ecosystem like pub dev and how to add packages to your application. And then we got into a little bit of code where we discussed what are widgets, what's the widget tree, what's the element tree, and how can we differentiate between stateful and stateless widgets. So that was a bit of a more theory-based workshop, which kind of prepped us to move on and to move forward into this next one. So this one is going to be a lot more code. I haven't got slides or anything like that. We're just going to dive straight in, and we're going to try and build an application within this, this hour. The target that we're trying to get is that we're going to learn how to structure a Flutter application. Obviously, folder structure is a big discussion, especially when it comes to front-end applications. Everyone has their own way. Ultimately, it's what makes sense to you. So we're going to go over kind of how we've done them within Philly, within our internal projects. We're going to go over how to create a theme, which was a question brought up by Gavin in our last workshop. How do we theme and make it consistent across the whole application? So we're going to look into that. We're then going to look into how we can build some proper views, which we kind of started in our last workshop. Important, how can we navigate between the views, right? So we have various pages. How do we move back and forth? How can we pass arguments between views? Obviously, another super important thing. How can we take data from one widget and pass it to another one? How to make HTTP requests, the core of web development, how to handle dependency injection, which is maybe a little bit more opinionated than the rest of them, but it's still something that's super important and cool to know. And then how to handle state, which we kind of covered briefly with our past workshop where we had the counter, but now how can we handle a little bit more complex state? Okay, cool. So from scratch, like last time, we can create a new Flutter application. Flutter, the convention is underscores instead of hyphens between where space would be in a normal English. Don't ask me why, I'm not quite sure about that. And the goal of what we're going to be building today is just going to be a very straightforward using JSON placeholder, which is, I'm sure you guys might have seen it before, used it when you're messing around. But it's just a couple of endpoints that when we hit it, it just returns a whole bunch of dummy data. So this endpoint gets us a list of posts. So that's going to be our one view where we're going to have a list of various posts. And we can see post ID 1. If we were to extend this to have the 1, it will get us that single post, right? So that's all we're going to be building, but I'm sure you guys can imagine that's like a list, and if it's single object in that list is the core of most of what we do, we just make it flashier and extend it a little bit. So the point of this is to build an application. Is very simple in essence, but it's completely scalable so that you guys can take the repo and you can start messing around and kind of going crazy. So let's open up the application that we have. Our workshop app. We open this up, it's going to be completely fresh. We've got the emulator already going. So just to remind everyone, our pubspec.yaml file, this is the equivalent of the package.json. It's where we're going to put any packages that we're going to import and make use of. And then our lib file is kind of where everything, all our main stuff happens, right? So by default, it creates this home page that has the counter, and that's all of the stuff we kind of messed around with last time. I kind of want to get rid of all of that and just do some things from scratch this time. So if we just clean up this, get everything that's in we have a method called void main, so on your main.dot file, and then if we can, so let's go import package, and then we say flutter material.dot. This should give us run app, and now this is where we're going to import our highest widget, our highest class. Okay, so I want to create a new folder for that. We're going to call it core, and we're going to have another folder called UI. So within our lib folder, we're going to have core, which is going to be everything that's not UI related, our services, our models, that type of thing. And then UI is obviously just going to be our widgets and our theme and stuff like that, things only relating to the UI. So somewhat just separating out those two concerns over there. So now if we check our core, actually not in core, sorry, within lib. Let's make a source folder. So we can throw core and that into there. Okay, cool. So we see within the lib folder, we have main and source. So main is our highest file. And then in here, we can create another file called app. Because app isn't really relating to your core stuff, or it's not particularly relating to your views. It's kind of going to be the thing that pulls it all together. So it actually doesn't make sense to throw it into either one of those, right? But in here, we're going to create our highest widget. So we can call it my app. And it extends. It's going to be stateless. So you guys remember stateless and stateful. So stateless widgets, we don't have to create from it, but we do have to give these override for the build method. So build method, again, returns a widget. I'm typing all of this out, like there are shortcuts, right, that you guys can use. But I'm just typing all of it out so you guys can, see that process. And then we're going to return a material app. So remember, we discussed kind of material and Cupertino and that type of thing. Material being Google's kind of flavor. We're just going to stick with that for now. It's simplest. It works best. It's my favorite. So we have a material app. And we can call the title of this our workshop app. We hover over, we can kind of see everything that it takes. Obviously, it takes in quite a bit. But you can see there's a title. It takes in a theme. And it takes in a whole bunch of things. It takes in a home view as well. It takes in default colors. So this is how you guys can kind of get familiar. Like I mentioned in the last workshop, that the toughest part about Flutter is not actually writing the code and figuring out how to use Dart or Flutter itself. It's just about knowing what the widgets are and what widgets to use in the right scenarios. Okay. So if we want to pass a theme into this, to answer Gavin's question from the previous one, we can create a theme and we can say, I think it's app theme. Was it app theme data? Theme data, there we go. So we can say theme data. And then over here, we can see it takes in a whole bunch of different things, such as a background color, brightness, button color, all of these types of things. We only really want like a primary color for this, and we can say colors dots any color we want, purple. And let's leave it at there for now. As you saw, you can extend this and have a whole bunch more stuff there, but we don't really need that for the time being. And this also, material app also takes a home view, right? So we're going to need to create that. But first, let's get our app into our main so we know what we're rendering. So we type my app over here. It should bring it in. So we can see it's imported from source app file. Cool. Any questions so far about just the difference between the main and the app file, anything like that? We'll get rid of the test.
I've got one. You go back to the other file, the app.dot.
So wait, so it ran for 3 months?
This return material app, if you wanted to have ones for both of them, material and Cupertino, is that an option, or is it just one?
So yeah, you could have either. There is a platform class built into Flutter that you can use, and then based I think it's platform.is iOS or .is Android, and then you could either like return each based on that conditional.
Okay, awesome.
Cool. And that kind of extends for any part of the application, right? Ranging from like your highest, like you said, the material app or the Cupertino app, down to if you want to have a button look more Android-y, or or the dialogue or something like that, something that stands out quite a bit on iOS in comparison to Android. But yeah, no, good question. Okay, so we have our theme data here, and we can add a home view. The thing with the theme data, though, is that this is going to apply it everywhere. But I would actually prefer if we abstract this out so that we can use it anywhere explicitly. If we want to say, hey, make this the color purple, but we don't have to then explicitly say purple, we can just say primary color, right? So you abstract that out so that everywhere in your app you can say use the primary color from the theme, use the primary color from the theme, instead of having to say use purple, because then if you want to change it to red, suddenly you've got to change it in a whole bunch of places, right? So if we head to our UI, I want to create a shared folder in here, and inside there we can put theme dot. And now this is going to be, let's import Flutter again. And we can say this isn't going to be an abstract class. Call it app theme. And then we just basically say what we had. It's going to be static. Don't have to worry about that. Theme data equals a new instance of the theme. And we just had primary. Take that out there. Okay, cool. So now if we say app theme dot theme data, and there we go. Okay, so now all of our other files are going to have access to this class as well, so they can make use of that. So like I said, we just abstracted it out. You'll see that as we start building out some widgets. Okay, so this is just all the setup, right? But now we need to actually have some views. So we go into our UI, let's create another folder called views. And like I said, we're just going to have the two. So we can say we've got a home view and a post view, where the home view is going to be like the list of everything, and then the post view will be that particular post that the user chose or something. So let's create a new class, home view. We can say extends stateless, because currently, like, let's make this incrementally. We haven't thought of any state that we're going to need in here yet. And then we have to override the build method, takes some build context. Then we can return a scaffold. So a scaffold is basically generally the highest widget on a view that is used to kind of frame everything that's within it. So this is what had our app bar, if you remember that from last time, where we can give this an app bar widget. And we can say the title is our workshop app. And that actually needs to be in a text widget itself, because you can make that anything. And then we need to give this a body. So we can see there, we can give it a body. And for the time being, let's just give it a center. So there, we've said this is what the app bar is going to be. It's going to be a text widget that has our workshop app as its content, and then the body we're going to center. So center will any child of it it'll automatically put in the center of the view, and we're just going to have a text widget that says home. So let's now actually get this running so we can start seeing what's happening. Any questions about any of these widgets we've used so far? No, cool, that's fine. Close this for now, close this for now. That's a folder down there. PostView . Let's copy paste this for the time being and just call this PostView. And instead of this, we can just say post, so we know the difference, and we say post. Okay, now if you remember, nothing's going to render here. The reason being is because we have not declared the highest root. We haven't said that there is a home, right? So we need to add a home, and that home needs to be a view or another widget, okay? So we've got two, we've got the home view and the post view. Instead of kind of a convention, like an index file in JavaScript or an export file, we can just create another file called views.js. And inside here, we can just export all of the files within this folder or within nested folders within this. Just so we don't have to, if we get to a time where we're having to import a whole bunch of different views, we can just make use of one file. So if we see here, so there we're getting home view directly from that file, but we could just say views and we still get access to it. So that's kind of cool. Let's just re-render this. Okay, cool. So we can see that this is purple, reason being because we set our app to purple, and we can see that it's saying home in the middle, right? Which is everything that we've got going on here, which is great. Except we have the second view that we want to be able to navigate to, right? So we need to set up that we can navigate to that. So in scaled applications, you would generally have like a router, and that router is going to handle have like a switch case or something like that, where you would pass it a string, and based on that string value, it would know which page it needs to navigate to. That's a little bit overkill for an application that's this simple. So we're just going to use the navigator class itself. So first off, let's create something that we can do. So we can create a elevated button, and this takes in a child, and we can say that's a text of we just say navigate, and then it takes in on pressed. So obviously that is what's going to happen when the user presses this button, right? So like I said, we can take the navigator class, and it has a method called .push. So on here, you're going to give it the build context, and we've spoken previously about the build context and how it kind of gives the application literally context of where it is within the stack and everything like that. And now we have to supply a route. So what we need to do here is we can give it a material. And the reason it's material is because it's going to navigate the way Google Android navigates between views. We give it that, and then it asks for a builder, and this builder is basically just the context again itself, which it will inherently then supply to whatever widget we call. So we can now say the post view, and that should be I think we have one too many. There we go. Okay, cool. So now we can see we've saved. We've got a button that says navigate. We click that button. I might need to just hot reload quickly. There we go. And we're having the same issue we had last time where the emulator isn't registering our clicks. Okay, so I'm going to close the emulator and save face because I learned from that mistake that happened in the last workshop. And we're going to open that up again. Meantime, so we were discussing the theme earlier and how that theme that we've set can do certain things, right? So if we look at this this elevated button, it might be in the text here. We can say the text takes a style, and we can give it a text style widget. And on here it has a color. So now if we had specified everything that that theme class took, which was a primary color, an accent color, a secondary color, stuff like that, then we could actually call the app theme class that we created, theme data, and then we could say, hey, use the accent color, use the app theme bar color or something like that. And in that way, it's kind of like not having magic strings in a sense. You've mitigated all of that. So that's kind of how you would go about theming, is that you have one class where you add all your various types of themes and colors and preferences and stuff, and then everything will automatically inherit from that. There we go. Okay, so we can see we have our workshop app. So this is the home view. We click navigate, and it takes us through to the post. So that's really cool, right? We actually now have pagination, and by default, you'll see up here, any view that has been navigated to and has an app bar inherently just has this back button, right? So we have that back button now that we can use to go back and forth between these. But what if we didn't want an app bar or something, or we wanted to programmatically control when we go back? Well, we could do another, let's get rid of this and make another elevated button and take in another child, which can be text, and we say go back. And then on pressed, we can do, it's a callback, so navigator dot pop. Let me give it the context so it knows where it's going. So now if we do this, there we go. So now we're programmatically popping back. So you could, that would happen when a user's made a post or something like that, right? And they go to a view or a dialogue or something where they create the post and then they press that button, it pops them back to the previous page so they don't have to manually do it themselves. Does that make sense? Kind of how the navigation is working to everyone?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so now we need to look at how can we actually pass in data to this post view that we have, right? So if we take this back to just the text widget that we have, what we want to do now is we want to ideally it would be the ID of the post that you selected. So let's just start setting that up. Okay, so we can say that this post view is going to take it's going to have a post ID, or it's going to have an int that is a post ID, and then we create a constructor for that where we say when you construct this you need to provide a post ID. Okay, that seems pretty straightforward. And then over here we can say post ID dot toString, because it'll be an int. So now when we navigate to this view, we actually need to give it this argument, and then it should show that argument. So if we now go check out the home view, and we look at the post view over here, if we start typing, we can see it actually has a named parameter we need to give it. So we can just say 5 for the time being. And now if that has worked, when we navigate here, we can see it showing 5, right? So if we go back and we change this to 100, and we navigate, it's 100. So now we're passing arguments in. And remember, arguments can be, we've instantiated an int class, but you could really pass in whole objects or something if you really want between views, even though they might be slightly more dangerous, because if something goes wrong, you maybe lost more data than you intended. But yeah, it's super simple. It's just a class where you are defining the argument and you have a constructor, and then you just pass that in. So that's pretty straightforward, and that's how we are going to tell it which post was selected and how it will know what URL it's needing to hit. So speaking of URLs, let's set up the service. So if we go to core, like I said, we'll have services and models and all that type of stuff here. We can have a services folder, and in here we can have a post service dot, and this is going to be a class called post service, and this is going to have our methods for getting all the posts and getting a single post. But let's just copy this as like our base URL for the time being, right? So that is our base URL, which we normally put environmental variables or something like that, but let's not focus too much on that. Okay, so let's start writing out our method that is going to get us a list of all the posts. So we just need to hit this URL with a get. The first thing we're going to need to do is to actually have a way to do that, right? So like this, the common one is Axios in Node, the Node world. On PubDev, they've also got a couple, but the most common is HTTP. So we go over here, we look. Future-based API HTTP requests. So obviously a future is like a promise of data. You know, every language has their own kind of name for this. So we go to installing, we can get the latest version over there, and then we can go to our PubSpec. And over here, we can add that. We press save on the file, it will automatically pull that down, kind of like an npmi or npm update, and get the latest version. And now we'll have access to HTTP. So if we were to check our imports, So we import package HTTP, and there we have it, HTTP ... and let's just cast it to something so we can make use of that. Okay, so we've gone over that before in the previous workshop, how to get a package into your application. That shouldn't be too foreign. Now we need to write a method for getting all of our posts. So we can say a future, which again is like a promise, right? So this is going to be a future. It's asynchronous because obviously it needs to make this request. And we're going to say dynamic for the time being. Dynamic is like an any, or, you know, we're not too phased on the type yet. We call this get posts. We can say it's async. And then we can say var response. I know Matt's probably thinking, why am I using var? Because I yell at him every time he does. But for the time being, this will be fine. So we can see HTTP has a couple of things on it. It has the get, which is all we need, and we can throw it the URL. So now that's going to go, and that's going to get us, we can see what this returns is the future of a response. So if we really wanted to give this a type, we could give this a response type. There we go. But the thing is that the if we check response.body, right? So obviously that's going to have, you know, the same code and the kind of all the normal stuff you guys would see. We're obviously only interested in the body, and the problem is that the body is just a string. So we're not going to be able to use that in any way because it's just going to be a long string. So we need to actually decode that. So if we create another var, we call it data. We say response, actually JSON. So there, JSON is packaged from .convert. So it's already built into Flutter and Dot, obviously. We can say decode, and then we can give it the response.body. So it's going to take that string, and then we can say as list dynamic. So that's basically going to cast it into something that we might be able to use. And then we can return that data. So that's going to give us basically a kind of like an object, not a model of anything, because like I said, it's dynamic, but that's going to give us an object that we should be able to use. Okay. Now we have our home view, we have our post view, we have our post service. We're now actually needing to get the post service and this method of get posts and make it available to the home view, right? Because the home view needs to make use of that as soon as the home view is initialized. So we need to look at how we can get that service there. And my approach and the preferred approach is dependency injection. Dependency injection, I'm not going to go fully into what that is and why you should do it, but it's basically just for inversion of control. And Get It is the most popular package to help you do that. You could write a whole complicated thing yourself if you wanted to, or you could just make use of this where someone else pretty much done the logic for you. So Get It is the most popular one. Again, we go to our YAML file and we throw it in here. And we save, and it's automatically going to import it. And now we need to create what they call a locator, which is just kind of where we can register all of our singletons or something like that, right? So I like to create a locator.dart file just inside the source folder, because again, it's not necessarily core. It's setting up core services from core, but to provide them to your view. So it's kind of ambiguous in that sense. But if we say get it and we import that, so we can see it's imported there, we call this locator and we say this is a getit.instance. And then let's make a method just called setup locator, because obviously we need to have this initialized and run at some point, right? So we're going to call this in our app.dart, so in our main.dart. So we go to main. Right now we have run app, which is obviously setting up the whole app. But we also want to now run our setup locator method so it can register all of the services and stuff that we want to make available to all of our views and stuff like that. So if we go to locator, we have the setup locator method. Now we actually need to make use of this locator that we have, and we can say register, and you guys can see a whole bunch of different methods here: singleton, lazy singleton, factory, all these different types of things. We're going to register a lazy singleton for the time being, and we want to register the post service. and that should import it from there. So now this is a good case for where I was speaking about the kind of like the index file or exporting multiple other files from a single one. Because if you have 10 services and you're using dependency injection, you're going to register all of them here, right? So it makes sense, instead of having 10 of these, where you just point to a different file, to rather have one file called services. So we go to core and we make that file. It's not necessary, but I'm just trying to show you guys how you can make this application as scalable as possible so that you can kind of just push it to the limits and everything that you need is set up. So now we have dependency injection and we have the post service registered as a singleton, which means that if we go over to our home view, we should be able to access that now, right? So we can say, we're going to take a final because the post service is never going to change. And we can call this post service. And then we're going to make use of the locator. And we're going to say we want the type post service out of this locator. And now that is going to return us an instance of the post service itself. Just need to do a hot reload. There we go. Okay, cool. So now we have our post service, and we have on the post service, we should be able to see. It might not be because this needs to be inside an init state. Okay, cool. So we spoke about how for the time being this was stateless. But stateless is generally used, like I mentioned in the previous workshop, to just render scaffolding widgets or widgets that are just taking in data and showing that data. The problem is now is that we're going to be making an asynchronous request, which means it might make sense to have a Boolean sitting on here that goes, hey, I'm busy doing something, so that when we are making that request, we can maybe show the user a loading indicator or something like that. And then also we need to be able to know when this view is initializing so that we can go and get the post from the post service. So we have to kind of refactor this and change this a little bit. So now this is no longer be a stateless widget. We can call this home view state, and it's going to be state of the home view. So now we're kind of doing it backwards to how I showed you guys in the previous workshop. Up here, we can then have a class called home view, which extends a stateful widget this time. Okay. And then on here, we have our override for our create state method. So we're going to say we're going to return a home view state, create state, home view state. Okay, cool. So remember, home view, that is our actual view. But because we are now making use of a stateful widget, we have to give it a state object that is going to be housed within the element tree. Again, we went over all of that in the previous workshop. Okay. So now, because this is a state object over here, we have access to a couple of things. So one of them would have been like a set state, like we kind of went over when we were using the counter. But also, we're going to have access to something called init state. And what init state does is that it allows us to, when this is initialized, do these certain things. So if you want to initialize state here, or if you want to fetch data, this is where you do it. So we can say, okay, cool, use our post service, and we're going to say get posts. And remember, this is asynchronous, so we can say .then, and let's just say this is some data. And let's make this multi-line for the time being. And now we need, let's just maybe print this data for the time being. I want to see what happens with that. I just want to make sure it's working. There we go. So we can see a whole bunch of nonsense, which is basically what these posts are, right? So we know that our service is working, we've set up dependency injection correctly, and when this view is being initialized, it is actually fetching that data, which is really cool. Are there any questions? Because we covered quite a bit there. Does anyone want me to go over something? No? Okay, cool. So we're going to keep going then. But the problem with this data now is that it's completely raw, right? We don't have a model or anything set up for it. So we actually need to create a model that when we get this JSON data, we can convert it into a model that we can actually instantiate. So if we create another folder in our core called models, and we can create a post.dart. So this is a single post, and we call it it's a class post, and then we can just say whatever this has, right? So this has a user ID, which is an int, an ID, which is an int, and then a title and a body that are both strings. So we can go final int user ID, final int ID. I don't even know if we're going to use the user ID, but hey, we can just have access to it anyway. Title and final string body, and then obviously we need a constructor, right? So we can say this user ID and this ID. Cool. So now we at least have a class of a post that can represent that model. But the problem is we don't have any way of taking the JSON that we have and transforming that into this. So that's where factory methods come in, right? So we can say we're going to use a factory method. And if you're more familiar with C#, you can think of this as kind of like an extension method. So we're going to say factory post dots, and we can say from JSON. So that is going to extend kind of a new method onto this type of class. And we can say we're going to take in a map of a string dynamic, because that's the type that we were getting as JSON. And then we can return a new post where now we can just throw all of our stuff in here. So we're going to return a post where the user ID is equal to the JSON square and then user ID. So this is how we could access the actual data. So on our home view, technically, we could take this data. I think if we did data, I don't know if this will work, 0, because the 0 index, and then like user ID, that might log something. I'm not sure. Let's try. Because that is the data, which is JSON, which has an array, and the 0 index of that array, and then user ID. Okay, so that worked. So we could go about and actually like make our list and render out a list using stuff like this, right? But there's so many points of failure there. We don't have a model, like that wouldn't be the best thing to do. So that's why we're rather going to create this post and instead take the JSON and turn it into an actual post. So then for ID, we need to do the same thing. JSON ID for the title, JSON title, and then for the body, JSON body. Are there any questions about this right now in terms of creating a model, the factory method? If you need me to go over this again.
All good?
Cool.
All good.
I wonder if there's any like tool that can kind of build that out instead of you punching it in, you know. So
Yeah.
you could just put ID, title, whatever, and then it could just build the rest.
Just define your class, and it would build that like from JSON method for you. Yeah, there is something like that. I can't remember what the name of it was. I used it a long time ago. But generally, yeah, the classes I've had to build haven't been that massive, so it wasn't worth the time to go and build that. You know, you build a model once, and then it generally works, and maybe you need to update it now and then. But if you're depending on some service like that, then you have to rerun everything every time you want to make a small change, right? So yeah, pros and cons, but I know definitely something exists. Yeah. Okay, so now on our post service, we don't have to say that we're sending back dynamic, right? Because now we can actually type this. So we can say we're going to send you back a list, and we're going to send you back a list of posts. Okay, so now we need to import post. Cool. And get posts, blah, blah, blah. We have our data, and we can say for var, so just a for loop. So remember, this is like a list of dynamic things. So that is how we were able to use the 0 index to get to that first index. We're going to say we need to create a new list of posts, right? So up here we can create a list of posts, call it posts, and just initialize it there. And over here we can say posts dot add post dot and then post. Does that make sense to everyone? In terms of what's happening there, we get our data back. We're turning that into JSON, and it's a list basically of a whole bunch of JSON things. And then we say for every post in that list, add a new post that we're creating using the from JSON method to this posts variable over here.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. And then we can return posts, and now we're returning a list of posts, which is super cool. So now if we go back to our home view, if we were to print data length, or we could still do 0, but now we can do dot, and there we go. So now we obviously have like IntelliSense and stuff on this, right? Because it is of an actual type, it's of an actual class, and now if we rerun this and it works successfully, then we should have, it should say 1. There we go. Cool. Okay, so now we just need to make it look like an actual view. We have this list of data, but we're currently not showing it at all, right? And we're also not tracking whether or not this, whether we're currently busy. So let's create something up here, just a bool, and we call it is busy. And by default, let's set it to true. So as the user comes into this page, it's going to be true. We can show them a loading indicator. And then inside here, so where we have this print right now, let's make that multi-line, and we can do a set state. Because remember, nothing will re-render unless you actually set state. And we can say is busy equals false. So we know after that asynchronous process, we can get rid of the loading indicator and maybe show them some data. And then let's also create some local post variable. I'm just going to have to import that so that we can actually cast this data to that. So we can say posts equals data. So now our view will have access to the actual data that we got, right? Because we're using init state to add initialization, go get the data, and then set state to update our local variables on the actual view itself. So now we can get rid of this this elevated button over here, and we could use center. Yeah, okay. So now we can do conditional rendering, right? I mean, you can use the ternary operator just like you would in JavaScript, in React. You know, you've seen it all over the place. So we can say is busy, which is a bool. And then if it's is busy, what do we want to do? We can show a text widget that says loading, and then we can style this. So we can style that to be colors.black and no. And we can say font size is equal to 24, so that's a little bit larger. And then if it's not busy, we want to show a list view. So list view is a widget built in, like native to Flutter. We want to separate it. So now we can see a couple of things here. So this is going to be when it's loading, show them this. When it's not loading, show them the list, right? So we can see we've got an item builder, a separator builder, and item count. So item count is just so it knows the number of items that it needs to show. So we can go posts.length for that, sorted. Item builder is just the widget that we are needing that is going to like separate, hence a separate list view between each between each tile or item or something, right? So we can give this a, I think it needs to take a build context and an int for the index. And we just give this a divider, which is, again, built in Flutter method. And then the actual item builder. So now this is what are we going to render and what are we going to show for each particular item. So what this list view is doing is basically a for loop. It's saying for every record of data, do this thing, right? So we can say that's why we give it this length, because it needs to know how many times. And then this item builder, you'll see, also takes in a build context, and it also takes in an int index. And what that means is that it's going to iterate that amount of times, and then to obviously increment the index, and then it will render out whatever you say. So we can go over here, and we can call another built-in widget called list tile, where a list tile takes in a couple of different things. So it takes in a title and a leading. So if you look at WhatsApp uses list tiles. So on your left is what we call the leading, and that would be like the profile picture of the person. And then the title would be the person's name. And then I think it's the subtitle is like the your last kind of message with that person. So it's kind of a standard convention. And then you have what we call trailing, which I think on WhatsApp is like the time it was last sent. So WhatsApp kind of started this whole thing, and now it's become quite common. So to give you an idea, we can say leading. So that's what's going to be on the left, on the front of it, I guess. And we can say posts and index, right? Because the current index. And we can say, let's just say id.toString, because the ID is an int after all. And then we can say title, and we can say, again, we have to go posts. So that part's kind of tedious, right? Because you need to go posts and then pass the index each time. And we can say title. And subtitle is what's up here.
Needs to be wrapped in text.
Thank you. Text, perfect. And then subtitle, also wrap that in text. And posts index sub body, right? Okay, it should be good. Let's do this. There we go. So you can see, I guess you couldn't because it already had loading, but if we hot reload again, so now it'll initialize the view. Just give it a second, and it's loading, right? Because it was currently busy. Then we get the data, we set the data to posts, and then we say is busy is no longer true, it's now false. And then our widget knows, okay, cool. We now are no longer showing this loading indicator. We're rather going to say, hey, show the list. So now we have this list, and you guys can kind of see what I was mentioning about WhatsApp, right? This is where the profile picture would be. Because we used a separated list, we kind of have this over here that I don't know if it's coming through for you guys. Maybe if we add a color to this, we can say colors.black. There, hopefully that's more prominent, but you can see kind of the separation, right? The thing is now is that while making this list, we've lost the functionality to navigate to our post view, right? So we need to add that back in, and that's where the list tile comes in again. So the list tile has a method called onTap, also a callback, and now we can do all the same stuff we had here, which was navigator.push, where it was taking a context and then a material root, page root, that took in a builder, which was build context, context, and then we say, give it the post view, and we have to pass in the post ID, which now, we can actually use the currently selected one. So we can say posts, and just like we did previously, index, and then we can say ID. So now if we check out our post service, that is still showing that, right? So if we click on this, we might need to do another hot reload. Oh, there's an error. Home view. There we go. There we go. So if we click on the first one, we have a 1 over there. If we click on 5, we have a 5 over there. So now we're passing the arguments in, and we have our list, right? And generally, your list might be like a précis object, right, where it's a smaller representation of the overall model. So it might just be the title and the body. But then when we navigate to the post, you know, it will have like the dates and all of this extra stuff, right? So let's quickly just add that functionality to this. So let's copy and paste this get post method, and we can just say, now we're going to have a get post, and we're not returning a list. We will return a single post, and it is going to take an int of a post ID. This we can get rid of. We can say post. We're just going to have 1 over there. We're still going to do this. We can use what is it? String interpolation post ID. So that's just going to append on the post ID that we had to that URL, and that's going to return not a list this time because that'll be a single one. And we can say over here, we're not going to return post. That can be a single post. So post equals post from JSON, and we give it the, and then we return that post. Cool. So exactly what we had here, just simpler because we are getting one particular post. We are turning that into JSON. We're then turning that into an instance of our post class, and then we're going to return that to the post view, right? So now we need to do exactly what we were doing earlier, where we need to take the post view from a stateless widget to a stateful widget. So I'm just going to do this really quickly, hopefully. Override post view states, create states. Okay, but now we need to pass in our post view is actually going to be rendered. So that needs to receive the post ID, which we then pass into the object. So we need to kind of do the same thing. This needs to receive a post ID, and then our post view needs to take in that post ID. And then when we create the post view state, we need to say, hey, here's your post ID. So we just make sure that is working as it's meant to. There we go. So that's still working fine now. Now we have to do the same thing we were doing earlier, which is where we had a bool that was is busy, and we said initially it is true, and we can have a post just called post. And then we have, we just import this in. We have our override for our init state. And over here, we now need to use the post service as a post service, and use our locator again for the. Now we have that post service. And we can say post service dot get single post, and we automatically it's passing in the post ID. We can say then let's call this data set state there, and exact same thing. So we say post. It's underscore post, sorry, underscore post, because it's local to this, equals data, and is busy equals false. That should get us our data. And now over here, let's get rid of this, and let's say a column, because a column can take in multiple widgets, and we can say we're going to have a text widget that is going to be post.title. And then we can say post.body, and let's just add a style to this to make it slightly font weight bold and font size 24. Okay, Then, yeah, so that error means that title is called a null, right? Because there is no conditional check here to render, should we be showing like the text loading or something? So right away, it's presuming that this post actually has data assigned to it, right? Which it doesn't. So let's copy what we had on the home view, this bit, and we can chuck that over here, I guess. Now, you might just need a hot reload because we added the service in. Okay, so we check out our first one. It's loading. There we go. It doesn't look pretty, but I mean, we can make it look pretty very quickly. But you guys can see if we go to the fourth one, there's a whole bunch of, you can see it's loading the right one, right? That's pretty much it. And with that, you guys can scale like endlessly. You have your dependency injection if you create multiple services. You have navigation. You have passing arguments between those views. You have some stateful widgets. You could go and, because say this widget here, right, this text widget that has loading is actually being used on the post view and the home view, we could abstract that out into its own file and then call it our own like loading indicator. Let's actually just do that to show you guys how quick and easy things become in Flutter. So shared, create a widgets folder, and we call this load indicator dot class loading indicator, extend stateless widget, and widget build context. Cool, so now we have that, and then on our home view we can go and get rid of this, and we can say bring in the loading indicator please, and on our posts view we can do the exact same thing. So now we've abstracted that out, and if we click, we can see it's still working as intended. So now, like, it's pretty endless once you understand Flutter and like the little widgets in terms of making things pretty and better. But you have all the stuff, right? You have dependency injection, you have post, you're making HTTP requests, navigation, a theme, all of that type of stuff.